I have the pleasure today of starting off the new series, which is about Joseph, and it's called Turning Dreams into Destiny. So I've got a very important question to ask you before I start. Has anyone seen the new Barbie movie? Because I have. I mean, it wasn't that great. My expectations were high, but I was a little bit disappointed. But if you haven't seen the Barbie film, I'm sure you will have seen some of the marketing for it, because the marketing for the Barbie film was everywhere. And as part of this, so the Barbie film has a really, really big cast of lots of different famous actresses, and they made these posters which would have a picture of the actress in character, and it would have a wee tagline. So it would say, "This Barbie is a diplomat," or "This Barbie won a Nobel Prize." And I was thinking about, when I was preparing for this, I was thinking about what that would be for Joseph, and I've answered that question. So this Barbie had a dream. So just to summarise really, really briefly the story of Joseph for anyone that doesn't know. When we first see Joseph in the Bible, he is a young boy of 17, and he has a gift of interpreting dreams. And he is from a really big blended family of 12 boys from 4 different mothers, and he was 11th out of 12. So he was very close to the youngest, and for most of his life he was the youngest. And he was really hated by his brothers because he was greatly favoured by his father Jacob. And his brothers actually sold him as a slave, and he was taken to Egypt as a slave and worked for one of Pharaoh's officials, Potiphar. He was then, through no fault of his own, I should add, put in prison, but his gift of interpreting dreams is actually what elevated him out of prison. He interpreted a dream for Pharaoh and ended up working for him and was second in command at, a global superpower. But when we think about Joseph, we don't think about someone who was a slave, or we don't think about someone who was in prison. And most of the time, the first thing we don't even think about is someone who had a really powerful position in Egypt. We think about someone who had a dream. I'm going to take that away because it's a wee bit distracting. So, why is that? Why do we just think of someone who had a dream? But the very first time we come across Joseph in the Bible, we're told about his dreams. We're not really given much of a backstory. Well, we are, but it talks about his dreams, and then it kind of says his backstory, and that is because God starts our story with the end in mind. His plan is a perfect mystery to us, and most of the time I have no idea what's going on, and sometimes I kind of delude myself into thinking I know what his plan is for my life, and I think it's really clear that he's going to be taking me this way, but then he takes me that way. And as much of his plan is a perfect mystery to us, it is also just perfect in its nature, and it is meticulous. Now, I don't know about you, but if I am given a job or a task and I'm working with other people, I always think that my plan is the best. It just is. And I know I get that from my mother. But because we think the same way and we are right, I accept that your plan is going to get us to the same point, but mine's better. It just is. And sometimes, even if I'm looking at God's plan for my life, hindsight is a wonderful thing, and I'll go, yeah, that I maybe struggled to believe it for a second there, but that really did work out for the best. But even in the moment, when I know that his plan is better than mine, but even still looking at it, I go, oh, I just love to tweak some things here and there. I'm a bit of a control freak. So while I was reading through the story of Joseph, and I don't know if anyone else does this or if I'm just a very self-centered person, but I always look for something that I can relate to in the people that I'm reading about. And a massive thing about Joseph that really stood out to me was that he was the youngest in his family. So I'm the youngest in my family. I'm the youngest of 3. And, just over a year ago, my sister got married, so I now have a big brother-in-law, Craig, so it feels like I'm the youngest of 4 now. And I was thinking about how I'm the youngest and Joseph's the youngest. And I realised that being the youngest actually really didn't do many great things for Joseph, and it made his life a lot harder. So the dreams that Joseph had about himself that we learn about really early in his story is that one day he is going to be elevated in a position of power above his brothers and even his parents. And that just made his brothers hate him even more. And if I was looking at God's plan for Joseph's life, I probably would have said, why have you made him the youngest there? If you were to make him the oldest, especially in a culture where it's shown all over the Old Testament, the importance of birth order for these people, and particularly the oldest son and what that should give him. And I was thinking, why wouldn't you make him the oldest? His brothers wouldn't be such a hard pill to swallow that your older sibling is in a position above you. So he would have had a much better relationship with his brothers and a much easier upbringing in early life. And he could have went to Egypt. This is a big thing for me. He could have went to Egypt in a much more pleasant way than being sold as a slave. I think, even like a really bad Ryanair flight would be much better than that. But he would have arrived in Egypt a really different person. Being the youngest did make it a lot harder for Joseph, but I was thinking there was no way God would do that for no reason. So I looked into what being the youngest sibling actually meant. Because birth order, it plays a huge part in making you who you are and your personality. And it was something I was interested in because I'm also the youngest. And I was looking at what traits and characteristics are really common in youngest children. And there was lots of different results. Some I related to, some I didn't. But there was 3 kind of overwhelming things that every website I looked at would say, and things that I see myself in as well. So the first one is persistence. Youngest children are generally very persistent, and almost because they have to be, it's like the only thing you have that's better than your siblings when you're growing up. So my sister's 11 years older than me, and my brother's 6 years older than me. So if we were doing things growing up, there was no way I could ever beat them at anything, and we're all very competitive. If you're the youngest, you're never going to be bigger or stronger or smarter. The only thing you have is that you care more. You can wear them down. And I know anytime we were ever playing board games as a family, which didn't happen that often because we're very competitive, I would just win by default. After a while, someone would get bored, or they would want to do this, or they'd want to do that, and I'd be like, oh, you don't want to play, I win by default. So youngest children generally really stick in with something. And another really common trait in youngest children is they're very hardworking. And I was thinking about that in relation to Joseph. And in a family so big, you would be working so hard for attention all the time. We know that Joseph was his father's favourite, but there's still 11 other kids to compete with. You're going to be, you're not going to be front and centre all the time, even if you are the favourite. And the last point that's really common in younger children is they're really, really driven, and they're really self-motivated. They don't need other people to encourage them. And if you take them out of their family situation, they'll still be very self-motivated, because it's a thing you put on your shelf a lot. And this is something that I definitely notice in myself. You put a lot of pressure on yourself to almost live up to your older siblings. And my parents are great, right? And my brother and sister and I were very, very different, and our strengths lie in very different places. So they've never really compared as much growing up. And it's not like a debilitating pressure, I'm doing great, I quite enjoy being the youngest. But you have so many great influences and examples and role models, and I see so many things in my older siblings that I think I want to be that makes them a really good person. I really admire this. I want to be like that. And I also think my sister will definitely disagree with this, but I think being the youngest child makes you quite humble, because someone said to me recently, and I absolutely could not believe it. It was after a thing that I'd done at church, and someone had said to my sister, she's just like you, but better. And I absolutely cannot believe it, because in my mind, there's no way I could surpass Kirsten in any way. It's not it's not something that like I really struggle with, but I could never picture myself being better than her at anything. So I think it makes you quite humble as well. And just to sum that up, God could have brought Joseph to Egypt 101 different ways. And looking at them on paper, a lot of them are really preferable to the way that he did end up going to Egypt. But God made Joseph the way he was. He made him the 11th son in a family of 12 to prepare him for the job that was coming, because it was Joseph's perseverance and persistence, his hard work, his self-motivation and his determination that are what helped him succeed in the rest of his life and pull off the amazing plan that God had for him. Much of Joseph's life as the youngest was really difficult, but his trials helped him to grow into who God needed him to be. And in Romans 5 it says, "We rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that our suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope." It was through Joseph's sufferings that he gained the character he needed to enact God's plan. And something that was really important to me was that God never left him during this time. Sometimes when we talk about trials that God uses to prepare us for what's coming next, it kind of sounds like we're on our own. It's like he set up this test for us, and he's saying, "I'll be waiting for you on the other side, and we're going to continue together." But he doesn't leave you during the trial, and he's with you the whole way through. And he was with Joseph in the time that he was preparing him. So this is a verse that is found when Joseph was working in Potiphar's household, and how God helped him to succeed there. So when his master, meaning Potiphar, saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favour in his eyes. So God didn't just put Joseph in a tough situation just so that he could learn from it and just so that he could become the person that God had planned him to be. Like, obviously he did that, but he was with him during that time, and he was always helping him. And when the situation looked really bleak for Joseph, he was always there making it easier for him. And this is probably a really old quote that everyone here has known long before me, but something that I've seen all over my social media recently. It's a sound on TikTok, and it says, "If God led you to it, he's going to lead you through it." And I just think that's such a good image, because it is so easy to talk about how he's with you through all the good times, but sometimes in the trials, you can't see him as easily as you can when everything's going great. But if it's something that he led you to that's going to be for your good, he is going to be with you during it. So if you're in a situation where you feel like you're just crying out to God and you want him to pull you out of the pit that you're in, I really want you to hold on to the thought that, like Joseph, he might be giving you the skills you need to do something really amazing. But also, he hasn't abandoned you, because if God led you to it, he's in it with you, and he's going to be with you all the way through it. And lastly, I just want to share something really incredible about Joseph that I find I just can't get over. In circumstances where it would have been really easy to think that God had abandoned him, Joseph clung to the fact that God is working all things for the good of those who love him, which is in Romans 8. I think that's so amazing. I don't know if I would be able to cling to that in that situation if I was Joseph, but this sounds a little bit rogue, right? But it's almost like in this situation, Joseph's a big brother to me, because he's like another example of something that I can follow and that I want to live up to. And the last verse just really embodies the fact that Joseph trusted in God's plan entirely. And this is when Joseph and his brothers are reunited, kind of at the end of his story. Spoiler alert if you haven't read the book. So, and now do not be angry, do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. It would have been so easy for Joseph to be angry at his brothers right now, and it would have been even easier to be angry at God. But Joseph saw that everything was done in his life to bring him to this moment. He recognized that God could see the bigger picture even when he couldn't, and he chose to trust in God's plan and ended up saving a massive empire from starvation. And God did everything that he did. He made Joseph the 11th son in a family of 12 because he started with that ending in mind. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.